Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Leaders in Trade Compliance show, or series, I should say. Today, we have Michael Lutz with us. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, I really appreciate you being here, and I'm sure everyone who's watching, they will really appreciate your insight and everything you have to offer, or some advice, even if you give some to them. So thank you so much. So everyone who's watching, please, if you join now, if you watched it later on, don't forget to subscribe. The more you subscribe, the more it's going to help other people be aware of this content as well. So thank you so much. So today we have Michael. Michael, why don't you start off by giving us just a brief introduction of yourself?
Great, thanks. Thank you for having me, first of all. And I do want to say before I start that the views I express are my and don't represent any of the opinions of any of the companies I work for now or worked for in the past. So just a real brief overview. I actually started out as an engineer, a process engineer, and then ended up switching to trade compliance, which I think we'll probably ask a specific question about that. After I had gotten an MBA, and then I got a law degree while working as well, and switched to venture capital, went to a startup, went back to Intel, then switched over to Google in the trade compliance role. Was at Google for about 11 plus years. For the last 3.5 years, I've been at NVIDIA doing trade compliance as well. So I've been in the trade compliance field now a little bit over 2 decades. Was an engineer for a little bit around 10 years or so, and was in the venture capital space for maybe 4 years or so.
So what made you switch from Intel to do your own thing, venture capital, and come back to Intel? What made you go through all of that?
Well, I had gotten my law degree when I was in trade compliance because I had switched to trade compliance after I got an MBA, and actually I had was interested in a tax job, so interviewed for a tax job, and the person there liked me but said I had no tax experience, which was true. And so then she introduced me to somebody who was running the customs group. And at that time, I thought customs was how you present a business card in Japan. I had no clue what trade compliance was. But I decided to jump into trade compliance using the technical background, and I had managed teams before. And so it was a good fit because we did product classification. But given the regulatory intensive nature of trade compliance, that's when I decided to get a law degree. And once I got the degree, I sort of felt like the group said, "Congratulations, you've got your law degree. Now get back to work." It seemed a little bit underwhelming because nothing really changed. So I decided to try something different for a while. So I went to venture capital. Intel had a group, an internal group called Intel Capital, and then I did that for a couple of years or so, and then I went to a startup in Colorado for a couple of years where I was on the other side where I was trying to raise money. And then I ended up coming back to Intel and to my old job after being in Colorado a couple of years. And then after a few years there, I switched to Google. So that was sort of a roundabout way of just trying different things. I'm one of those people who never really quite knew what I wanted to do. So when an opportunity came up, I would just try it. And then if I liked it, I would stick with it. And if not, then maybe another opportunity would come up.
That's awesome. I feel like a lot of people are like that, everyone wants us to have everything figured out, but let's be honest, when we're in our 20s and stuff, we don't really have that much stuff figured out, right? We're still trying to figure everything out, what we really want to do, or we like this job, but we're not sure if we want to do this for the rest of our lives. It's just a continuous improvement, I guess, So that's great. So when you went from you were at Intel, you left Intel, then you came back, and then you went to Google. I'm just curious, what made you or your career grow in that portion, in that timeline? Because you know how you mentioned that previously you were at Intel, you got your law degree, but nothing really changed. And I feel like that's still how it kind of goes on today. You're working, you get an MBA or you get your bachelor's degree, but that doesn't really change or affect the job that you're doing every single day. And it, like you said, it can be underwhelming. You know, you're like in your head, you're thinking, I went through so much, I have this degree, and I was expecting something to happen because of it, but nothing has really changed. So what happened in the timeline that kind of helped push you forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what it really was um, I had the expectation that things would change once I did get the degree. But one of the things I realized was it really was up to me to change the nature of the job rather than have somebody come to me and say, oh, now you have your MBA or now you have a law degree, and here's what we're going to do. And so I guess that was one of my learning lessons is, it has to come from you to determine what you want to do and what you want to focus on, and you can change the nature of your job. And sort of through that period of time, that's something where I learned that rather than just be a transitory career move into trade compliance, it was actually something that I really liked to do because it allows me kind of to use all of my background that I have. The technical background is very helpful in terms of being able to talk to engineers and debate them and ask the right kind of questions. The law degree is really important when you're doing deep regulatory analysis,
Mhm.
and sometimes just from the standpoint of having a law degree, people might respect you more than if you don't, which is unfortunate, but sometimes it's kind of true. And so, but I could leverage all of those things and the history of having seen regulatory changes. And one of the other things I realized that I like is I don't necessarily like to do the same thing every day. And
Mhm.
especially in the last few years or so in trade compliance, it's definitely not been the same thing every day.
Mhm.
Rules are constantly changing,
Mhm.
and it's always an opportunity because a new rule comes out, and if you read it 3 times, you're as much of an expert as anybody because it's a brand new rule. So
Mhm.
you always have the opportunity to be an expert in something, and so I think that's what I like about the dynamic nature, which it's also probably what I complain most about the field, but it's also what I like most about it is that it constantly changes.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I always say the same thing. You know, even on my past couple of to my couple of past guests, I've told them that what I love about this field is the fact that it's so dynamic. You know, it's so it multifunctional. You never do the same thing every single day. You know, I feel like at least for my day, you know, it's there's something new every single day, and the fact once you push beyond those simple roles like classification or an entry writer, when you go beyond that, you kind of fall into that zone where you interact with everyone around you, right? Whether it's legal, whether it's purchasing, whether it's engineers, whether it's HR, you're talking to everyone at the same time. And it seems like with you, the fact that you had your engineering degree, well, you were an engineer, then you got your law degree, and then the fact that you could use all this to kind of leverage and push your career really helped you, you know? And that's amazing. I feel like the lesson learned in this and the lesson that other people should take is that no matter which degree you have, you're only going to grow if you kind of push yourself to grow. If you're interested in this field, if you love this field, you will want to grow, and that's going to kind of help you search for the right position, the right role, and the right people that will kind of help you grow as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think you have to be a curious person, wanting to continue to learn and learn new things. And, in terms of, giving people advice about that, you want to be able to leverage everything that you've done in your past
Hmm.
because that brings a unique perspective. Whatever you've done in the past, you have a certain perspective based on your upbringing, what you've done, who are your friends, who are your family, and you want to bring that unique perspective to whatever you're doing, and then
Hmm.
be curious and continue to learn and leverage. And I think trade compliance is one of the few areas where you really have to have a whole sense of what's going on everywhere in the company, and you're going to interact, like you mentioned, with just about every group, sales and legal and finance and tax and purchasing and engineering. And so it's really unique in that you do scan and you have to understand all that's going on, in the company. And then, the other thing that is good to do, especially when you're first starting out, there's really some basic foundational things in trade, knowing how to classify, whether it's HTS or ECCN or both, and knowing how to look at regulations. Some things are really, really important because, again, you're going to face new situations, if not daily, very often. And it's not always what you've done and what it's how do you solve a new problem. And if you understand the basics and have those down really well, you can deal with any problem, and sometimes you'll need help, and it's good to have a network of people that you could reach out to and say, hey, I'm seeing this problem. I'm wondering what you think about it. Or, it's a kind of a danger when you work in compliance. You think you're always all alone and doing these things. And if you reach out to others, you realize, oh, you're going through the same thing. This is confusing.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. That's why it's so essential to have a network, especially because the way the regulation is always written, not just trade compliance, it's just the way the laws are written, it can be so intimidating. It's kind of like, am I doing the right thing? I want to understand this stuff, but I'm not sure if this is exactly what they mean, stuff like that. And when you have people you can reach out to, it really helps you to understand what things really mean, and if other people are facing the same thing. That's why I always tell people like you, whether it's in my community, in my profession, or people around me, my teammates, I always tell people, always reach out to other people, and always get training. Even if you're not using something today, if you see a training, grow. If there's a seminar, the webinar, some kind of training, go to that. Even if you think you're not using this today, it's going to help you in the future. And that's going to really help you understand some of the basic stuff from different points of view that you may not even be using every single day.
Yeah, really, really good point. What I've done is the other thing I try to do is when there's something that I don't especially like, I try to embrace it and find a way to like it. And so I've never really liked doing progress reports, for instance. But what I've decided to do with the ones I have to write now is I also have a portion of it where I make it a kind of a newsletter. I scan trade news and look at, cases that popped up or new rules or all that. And, I wouldn't do that if it wasn't part of my daily job. But what I've seen happen over time is that, there'll be a new rule about Russia or something, and we don't have the issue that day. But then 3 months later, something pops up, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember writing something about Russia, and I can go back and, I stay current on that rule, even though it wasn't directly affecting us on that particular day. So.
No, I definitely get you. With me, it's kind of like that, and that's another reason why I do what I do right now on the side, is because it forces me and kind of pushes me to know what's going on. There's so much time we have during our workday, and there's so much that's changing every single day. This kind of keeps me in the loop of what's going on, what kind of new regulations are coming out, whether it's importation or exportation, especially with export control. I feel like there's something new, some new law or change in law that's happening every single day. So it's always good to have that kind of a push on yourself where you kind of see what's going on as things come out. So that way, when you see them later on, or when you kind of need to use them later on, you at least remember, oh, I know I saw something about this, so let me Google it again.
Yep. Or if there's a new product that your company comes out with, or a new market they want to enter, or something, it's important. It's very difficult, but it's important to stay on top of those things, because you never know when they'll pop up and become important to in your present job or in a future job.
Yep, definitely. So During your time, what would you say is or are some of the hard or soft skills which kind of helps you succeed, like degrees help, kind of knowing how to navigate the regulations do help, having some technical knowledge does help you with the questions. But at the same time, what do you feel like are some of the main skills which kind of helped you push beyond using that education that you had. For example, I have a custom broker exam, and just like the law degree, it's great to have and it gives you authority and stuff, but it doesn't make you any smarter than what you already are. The hard work that you put in, that's what's going to matter. So, what are some of the hard skills that you would say really help people grow in this field?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier, but there's some foundational things that are really helpful about knowing how to classify, knowing how to look in regulations. And I think part of it is just not being afraid to do that, not being afraid to look at regulations, because you're not going to know all the answers. And fortunately now it's a lot easier because you just do a Google search, and if you get the right keywords, the right regulation will come up, or you go onto BIS's website.
Thank
But
God.
I think that just not being afraid of really digging into something and forming an opinion, and
Hmm.
just the practice of trying to figure something out is really a good habit to have. And then, in terms of, if you're managing a group, I think you really want to understand that the stresses that are in compliance, and you want to really support people and team members, because one of the scariest things I think is when you have a critical compliance situation and you have to make a call, and you don't want to be the only one that's looked at it to make the call. You want to have a couple set of eyes look at it, make sure that you're not going to send the company off in the wrong direction or give bad advice. So being there and being able to discuss and openly discuss and chat with other people about certain things, kind of to help you and guide you.
Hmm. And I feel like um, I feel like it's harder to enter this field than to actually grow into it. When you're in it, you have a kind of a network of people around you that can kind of help guide you and maybe help you through some of the issues you face. So I think it's harder to get into this field than actually once you're in, kind of grow your career as a trade compliance professional, right?
I would agree. I think it's probably somewhat intimidating when if you first enter it new, just because there's so many changes that have happened, and if you enter it, you're not aware of the history.
Hmm.
Something like if you look back on something like encryption rules, and you think back in during World War II, it was a munition, and it was cracking encryption was critical to the fate of the war. And
Hmm.
how things have changed over time, and it's layers on top of layers. And if you just look at the regulations right now, they're kind of a confusing mess, but they've been layered on top of decontrols over decontrols over
Hmm.
decontrols, and it's just really complicated things. And so
Yeah.
that could be intimidating if you don't have the history and know how we got to where we are and why they're so convoluted.
Hmm.
So
That's why I feel like you have to be invested into this field.
mhm.
If you're just coming in, doing your job and just leaving, not really thinking about the stuff that you're doing, it can be hard to kind of grasp and grow within this field.
Yeah, and I think the recent um, kind of the recent trends in the field, both import and export. Import because of all the tariffs, and export because of all the geopolitical
Hmm.
considerations, especially with China. The field has gotten a lot more visibility in the last few years. Companies have had to make important supply chain decisions and decisions about what or who they can supply and who they can't supply. So it's gotten way more visibility, which is both good and bad. I mean, I think it's shed its light on the field. I think most people never realized how complicated it was. I think most companies thought oh, I know I need some people that do something, and they're called trade compliance. I know they keep asking for more people, but I don't understand why. I have one or two of them. I don't know why I need more. I think what's happened recently is the nuances and all the different aspects of trade have come out, and people higher up in companies have realized how important it is to have the expertise. And so I think that's been good from the visibility, but it's also the downside is it's added a lot of stress because, you know, you're suddenly interacting with senior VPs or CEOs or CFOs, and they're going to want to question when you're online with them immediately. And so you really have to hone your skills and be able to present to the audience that you are presenting with, you know, so what you might talk about in a staff meeting in details, that's not what the type of answer you can give when you're with higher ups. They want a bottom line. Can I do this or can't I do this?
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit kind of, it's like you say, it's both a good thing and a bad thing, you know. I mean, it's good in my opinion overall that the goods outweigh the bad, because for us as professionals, it helps us, you know, and it kind of shows the importance of trade compliance. I'm just curious, in your lifetime, have you usually had small teams or big teams? Because like you said, it's hard to justify like more than one or two people in trade compliance, because you can't really, a lot of time you can't show the monetary gains or the savings which come with other departments. You know, it's more about trade compliance, it's more about regulatory compliance and that kind of stuff. And there is savings when it comes to duties, especially with section, you know, section 301, section 232 and all of that. But before that, before section 301 and 232, some of these savings existed, but it was kind of expected, you know. It was kind of like, okay, we're saving money and we need one or two people. So I'm just curious, in your lifetime, have you worked with small teams or big teams?
You know, I've worked with really small teams and relatively large teams, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Like what I've found is the size of the team depends a lot on kind of the age of the company and size, and then whether it's hardware or software related. So when I joined Intel, by the time I got into trade compliance, you know, they had a well-established team because they were used to dealing with hardware, and I'd call it relatively big. You know, worldwide it was, you know, probably 75 people for all in. And I think it's bigger now. When I went to Google, I was actually the first trade person they had.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that I would call a small team.
It can be more than that, right?
Right, exactly. And you know, through the 11 years, it grew to, you know, just over 20 people, which was kind of nice because it was, you know, I got to pick who was going to be on the team, or and also obviously they picked Google and the team as well. And then NVIDIA, the team is just over 20 as well. So it's you know, and actually I tend to like that size of a team, just because you can feel like you know everybody on it. It's not so big that you start to lose touch with every member of the team. When I've had larger groups before, I feel like beyond that size, you start to lose touch with the, you know, everybody as an individual, and that's, you know, some people like that. I prefer kind of a smaller team, if you will, so that I know everybody on the team and I can work with them directly rather than, you know, have a chain of command.
No, it makes sense. And as someone who kind of who grew into my current role, I feel like as someone who's either starting out at the lower level or mid level, you know, or going up, it's also good to have a team which is pretty much that size and not too big, because then I feel like if you go beyond that, you kind of seem like just one of the many copies, you know. And as someone who wants to grow, at least from my point of view, as someone who wants to grow, that kind of intimidates you. It's kind of like you feel the same as everyone else. How are you any different? How can you grow? It's kind of hard to justify that and try to figure out how you will grow in the future. And that kind of will probably make you look towards other roles as well. So I feel like you mentioned about 20 people, that's sufficient. But when you go beyond that, it kind of you lose touch with who is who, whether maybe you're not interacting with the people you need to, or the upper management or lower management like you want to. So it's kind of hard to justify how you're doing better than everyone else around you.
Yeah, and you could tend to get larger than that. You could get so specialized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the nice things about trade compliance is having more than just a niche, because it's such a broad field. Most people think it's pretty narrow, but when you look at all the different aspects of it and how you can be an expert in, just in customs valuation, you can spend a whole career just on that.
Yep, exactly.
But I think it's nice to get a little bit broader when you're working in-house, to be able to just see more of what's in trade compliance and do more.
Yeah, that's what I like. I feel like I think that was one of the main reasons why I left my initial job, because I was doing the same thing every single day and I wanted to do more. I was in classification, right? So I was doing great, I was doing amazing, and I was great at it. But I wanted to learn more about trade compliance and about everything around me. There's so much you see out there, whether it's importation, exportation, like I said, ECCN, regulatory. It's there's so much out there and so much you can do. And to me, that's amazing. That's what I love about this field.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about Intel, Google, and NVIDIA, I'm just kind of curious, how has your role changed? You were engineer, then trade compliance counsel, then director of trade compliance and senior director. I'm just kind of curious, and I'm sure other people who will watch this later on as well, they would kind of wonder, from your point of view, to get kind of an insight on how your role has changed as you progress, as you go up in this career.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think as you get a higher title, I guess, your scope tends to broaden. So, as a director of trade compliance, you end up having both import and export and worldwide responsibility. So you're probably going to have people outside the U.S. if it's a multinational, and understand the issues and some of the rules that you'll face importing and exporting out of, depending on which company you're talking about, wherever the regional hubs are, or the specific countries where you have a big presence, or or where you might do an acquisition. And so you just tend to see a lot more issues as you grow. And again, it depends on the company as well. Google was a company that was into a lot of different things. So I probably saw more different categories of export control and more countries that we would have imported items into than I've seen anywhere else. But in my present job now, I span both import, export, and globally, and I have plenty of issues on my plate.
Yeah. It seems like as you grow, everything gets more complex along with the bigger picture that you get, You have to understand more, you have to do more. That's awesome. That's some great insight. Thank you so much. So another question that people usually ask me, I have people that talk to me, sometimes they're in this field and sometimes they want to enter this field. And especially in the current age, or because of COVID and everything, it's really hard for people to find jobs. So aside from finding jobs anywhere, I'm just curious what you can tell them if they want to, because whether we're talking about Intel, Google, and NVIDIA, these are some great international companies. So if some of these people want to grow and work with these great companies, what kind of skills or what kind of stuff should they be doing or looking for so they can have a better chance at developing their careers within these organizations?
Yeah, I think first when you're going to look at a company or do an interview at a company, doing research on the company, what are their products? And if you're looking at trade compliance, what do you think some of the issues would be? If you can find out their global footprint, where they're located, what their products are, and then think about what types of issues they have. Because if you think about two different candidates coming in, and one comes in and it's like, hey, hi, how are you? And what do you know about NVIDIA? And it's like, oh, I don't know. I heard the stock price went up, so it's a really good company. And then the other person comes in and is like, I saw your GPUs are used as both accelerators and data centers, and they're great for gaming. And you have, who's going to make the better impression right off the bat? And so that's important as a starting point. The other thing is, interestingly, I look at it as a failure on my part if I can't ask a question that somebody doesn't say, I don't know the answer to that, but here's how I would find the answer. Because to me, that is the most important skill, because I'm not looking to hire somebody that's going to do the same thing every day.
Yeah, I think that matters.
Yeah, what I want is, you're going to see some unique problem, and I want you to be able to solve that unique problem. And so it can't be something you've seen before, but I want to know, what's your approach? How would you handle it? What's your insight into what and so if somebody says, I don't know, but here's how I would attempt to find the answer, to me, that's a great answer, because then I've asked a good question. And if they have the right kind of approach, again, if their approach is like, oh, I don't know, I guess I'd just Google it and the first hit is the answer. Well, probably not the best answer. You want something a little bit more systematic and more thorough than that. But somebody who has the right approach is going to be able to answer a new question or a new situation. Because you don't want somebody just to be able to whip off all the answers all the time, because that's not interesting to them, or you're not challenging them enough if that's what the job is.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're like in trade compliance, it really matters on knowing how to find the answer more than actually knowing the answer. Because I mean there's so much out there, like we just spoke about. There's absolutely so much out there that you can't ever know everything, I mean, you will come across topics which you know nothing about. You will come across topics which you don't have the information about. So knowing where to find it and how to find it is really going to make the difference in whether you succeed and do well for the organization you're going to work for.
Yep. Yeah. Like 6 months ago or a year ago, if somebody said, well, what would you do if you had a military end user from, Russia? How would you, it wouldn't have been a thing to worry about. And suddenly there's a new rule and there's a new list. And, how do you handle that? What do you do? And how do you then set up a process that you can make sure the company is complying with that rule? And that's the important piece, is among others, is just being able to take something new, be able to analyze it, and then figure out how to operationalize it, and then get ready for the next new thing.
Exactly, especially in today's age, right?
Right.
So I'm just curious, do you give, when you hire someone or when you want someone else to hire someone, what do you give more weight to? Is it the skills, soft skills, hard skills? Is it education? Is it experience? What matters more to you?
I'd say probably one of the more important things, at least sort of before COVID, was kind of a fit with the team. Are they going to be able to work with the team? And then are they curious and interested in learning? Because I think that, unless there's a specific position that requires a lot of experience, the degree and the experience is perhaps a little bit less important. It's really about, do they have that curiosity? Are they have the right approach, and can they work with others on the team? Or And the reason I mentioned COVID is because when everybody's remote, I think it's a lot harder to judge that aspect, because you can't sit in the same room with them right now and see how they interact and meet other people in face to face. But I think that was probably more important. There are times when it required a degree. If you need to have attorney-client privilege, then you have to have an attorney. But if it's not a requirement for the job, then it's really who's best suited temperamentally, and then who has the right attitude about trying to find the answer and the right approach to that answer.
And I was wondering, do you personally care whether someone has a custom broker license within this field or not? Because I've talked to a lot of people. Some people have the broker license, some don't, some care about it, some don't. Sometimes it's just a requisition you put out there with a job description to you or companies other same size as yours. And how much does that really matter?
I people on the team, I've encouraged, if they want to take it, and try to reward them when they have done it. And I have utmost respect for anybody who does it. The pass rate is lower than any bar exam or any other test that I know of. So it's like, hats off to anybody who has their customs broker license, but it's not per se a requirement. I think it is a credential that says, you studied this, you took the test, and you did really well, and with a pass rate of around 15 to 20%. So it does say something, but it tends not to be a requirement per se, but I certainly am impressed by anybody who's got their license.
I took mine October 2019. I think the pass rate for that was like 4% or lower. That was, I think, the second lowest pass rate in the history of the exam. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was a crazy exam.
Yeah.
So before we finish, I just want to get your opinion on what you think of. I know you focus more on the export side than the importation side of things. Where do you think it's going to go in the future? As we move on into the future, do you think we're going to be more focused on export control issues, or do you think as time goes on, maybe, for example, the US resolves things with China and Russia and other countries, and the export side of things will kind of decrease a bit? Where do you think it's going to go in the future?
I think the political situation right now is such that it would be very difficult to so-called resolve things. So I think we're going to, at best, stay at the current level of geopolitical tensions, but with risks that it may bounce into a little bit worse. If you look at what's happened in the last number of years, I think that in the past, export controls were really about, controlling weapons of mass destruction.
Yep.
And so-called dual-use items, and there started to be a trend to putting higher fences around fewer items and all that. But what's happened more recently is it's become a tool, and kind of, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail to it, and we've started to use it in ways that go beyond the way it was used historically. In terms of, used to be for foreign policy and the weapons, but now it's turned into both an economic tool and a punishment tool, and human rights and supply chain and investment, CFIUS. And I think what's happened is there's been a framework set up, and a lot of things want to just plug into that framework and say, if you already have this system in place, I can just add this company to a list, or I'll change the rules of the list to get what I want here, because and unfortunately, I think that's very hard to reverse, and that will cause effects in response. So, just like with OFAC sanctions, because the dollar is so prominent in the world, they're very, very highly leveraged sanctions because we shut off the dollar, and if you overuse it, then you create incentive for people to find another way to transact without using dollars. And I think that's what we're going to see is, if they're overused, you're going to have the supply chains start to separate. And, in China is going to invest more in semiconductor manufacturing and semiconductor manufacturing equipment and designs and EDA tools and so on, because we've started to leverage them perhaps a little bit too much, and maybe not in as strategic a method as we should have thought about. And I don't see that changing in the short term, because even with the Huawei situation, if you look at what happened when cabinet post positions were by the Biden administration were chosen, people put in a reservation to say, well, you didn't guarantee you were going to, get harder on Huawei. Therefore, we don't want you to be Commerce Secretary. I think that now it's become politicized, rather than people sitting back and saying, how should we really use these tools we have the most strategically? What should the U.S. be doing from a policy standpoint, and how can we best, if we're going to say China is both a customer and a competitor, what's the best strategy we can have for staying ahead? And rarely does it involve restrictions, blanket restrictions, but that seems to be a direction we keep pushing in. And I think what that does is it just sends a message to whoever you're trying to keep something from, that they have to develop their own stuff faster. And
it's funny that you mentioned that, because a couple minutes ago I was on Google and I saw a headline saying that we have actually pushed China to make their own semiconductors, so now they're even better at it than they were before. So that's exactly what you're talking about. We have to leverage these tools, but we have to have a balance, between how much we use them and how far we push the other people to come up with another way. And I feel like the thing that fuels everything is the fact that technology is evolving so rapidly. I think that's one of the main factors. Whether we're talking about cryptocurrency, whether we're talking about blockchain technology, whether we're talking about just technology in general, everything's evolving so rapidly, and there's just so much out there that we're trying to control something which is growing faster than it can be controlled.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think you have to ask, how did we get to where we were? If you say that in the past we've been the technology leader, how did we get there, and what did we do? And should we learn from others who are investing more heavily in the space, and should we not be afraid of government guidance about what's important or what's not? And so I think that we need a strategy, and we need to focus on how we can continue to move faster. What if you entrench and say, I'm going to protect what I have, instead of focusing on how do I move forward faster? I think that's when you, in the end, you give up our greatest strength as a country. And I think we should be focusing on how do we try to move as faster ahead as fast as we can, and rather than just focus solely on entrenching and considering the past that we were so far ahead. How do we keep ahead? How do we just push ahead further?
And it's all about getting the right people to do the job. If you have the right people to do the job, we can stay ahead. And it's kind of like within trade compliance. You can't always look at what was done in the past. You have to always think of the future. How will you handle new stuff, whether it's new technology, whether it's new countries coming up with new ways. How can you handle something? And it's always coming up with some new strategy to see how we can handle everything and make the progress that we need.
Yep, exactly. Yep. You don't want to be doing this very same thing 5 years from now that we're doing today. We have to progress. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So Michael, before I let you go, could you give some advice to the people who are either in this field and want to grow or want to enter this field, how should they go on to make progress in their lives and in their careers, I guess? What should they be focused on? I know we discussed a couple of things that they can do, and for the people who watch this later on, I would suggest go back and look into what Michael says. He gives some great advice on some of the great points. Whether you want to enter into this field, whether you want to grow into this field, there are a lot of good points that he mentions, and it's going to help you a lot. So besides that, though, Michael, anything else from you?
I think always continue to try to learn. Try to leverage whatever you've done in the past, because you bring that even if it's just a perspective, or if it's some kind of knowledge. And then I've run across a lot of people in my career who are like, well, I'm not technical, so I don't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, but then try, sit down with somebody or read something about it, because in trade compliance, it really helps to have some understanding of the products, know what your company is making and the markets they're going into, because that'll help trigger compliance concerns. And then what you need the types of advice you need to give about those products or those markets, or what some of the issues would be. So don't be afraid, because nobody's ever going to be as much of an expert as the person who developed the technology. But continue to show an interest and try and try to leverage whatever you've learned and your perspective, and be curious.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Try and don't be afraid to try, especially when you're in the beginning of this career or even in life in general. Honestly, if you want to do something, just try and don't be afraid. It's life. I mean, honestly, you have it once, go for it. That's what I would say.
Right.
So,
Yeah, no, in any situation, if you're whatever field you're in, if you're in a room discussing something and somebody's just sitting there, listening and head down taking notes, or somebody's there and actively like, I don't understand, can you explain that a little bit more? And over time, that person that is really asking the questions and trying to understand, you're not gonna understand 100% or 50% or whatever, but by asking the questions and showing the curiosity, and people will then take the time and say, hey, let me teach you a little bit more about this. You seem really curious, and there's some background that would help. And you can get the opportunities by being that person who's curious and who wants to learn. Don't make it a nasty thing, but make it I really want to try to understand this, because I think that if I combine whatever knowledge you have, whether it's regulatory or whether it's market knowledge or whatever, with whatever knowledge somebody else has, that's how you get to a better decision. And that's why you have teams, and that's why you have diversity of people and opinions, because that's how you ultimately get to the best answer, is all the different things that come together and gives you the best path forward.
I totally agree with you. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on this series and everything that you said. Yeah, I really, really appreciate it and really enjoyed this talk with you. So thank you so much, and I'm sure anyone who's watching, they got some great point from this. So thank you so much again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you again. I think what you're doing is a great thing for everybody in the industry. So I'm glad I can support it. So.
Thank you so much again. Okay.
Thank you. All right. Bye.